Gaza, a densely populated Palestinian territory, faces a dire humanitarian crisis as Israel halts all food and supply entries. This blockade, implemented on March 2, 2025, is a tactic to pressure Hamas, the governing authority in Gaza, into accepting a U.S. proposed ceasefire agreement. Israel claims the blockade is necessary because Hamas steals aid supplies, preventing them from reaching the people of Gaza. However, this action has severe consequences for the already vulnerable population. With limited access to essential goods, prices are skyrocketing, leading to fears of famine and widespread suffering. The situation is particularly alarming because Gaza heavily relies on humanitarian aid. Since a previous ceasefire on January 19, approximately 600 aid trucks entered Gaza daily, providing a lifeline to its 2 million residents. The blockade abruptly cuts off this vital supply line, leaving Gazans with dwindling resources and a sense of despair. Hospitals, already strained by the ongoing conflict, face shortages of medical supplies, jeopardizing the lives of patients in need. The blockade has exacerbated an already precarious humanitarian situation. The blockade's impact extends beyond immediate shortages. The disruption of essential services, including electricity and water sanitation, poses significant health risks, particularly to children and the elderly. Moreover, the psychological toll on a population living under constant threat and deprivation is immeasurable. The blockade has created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, compounding the trauma already endured by Gazans. Many argue that Israel's blockade constitutes collective punishment, a violation of international law. By denying essential goods and services to an entire population, Israel is effectively punishing civilians for the actions of their government. This tactic contradicts international humanitarian principles, which emphasize the protection of civilians during armed conflict and the unimpeded delivery of aid to those in need. The international community has condemned Israel's blockade of Gaza, denouncing it as a violation of international law and a form of collective punishment. Egypt and Qatar, key players in mediating previous ceasefires, have accused Israel of using starvation as a weapon against the Palestinian people. They argue that the blockade amounts to a siege, which is illegal under international humanitarian law. The United Nations has also expressed grave concerns about the blockade's impact on Gaza's civilian population. The UN humanitarian chief called Israel's decision alarming, emphasizing that international law requires unimpeded access for humanitarian aid. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, warned that reversing the progress made during the ceasefire risks plunging the people of Gaza into despair. The ICRC stressed the importance of upholding humanitarian principles and ensuring the protection of civilians in conflict zones. Furthermore, 5 prominent NGOs have taken legal action against the blockade, petitioning Israel's Supreme Court to lift the restrictions. They argue that the blockade violates international law and constitutes a form of collective punishment. They cite numerous international conventions and treaties that Israel is obligated to uphold, emphasizing the illegality of using food and essential supplies as a bargaining chip in political negotiations. Kenneth Roth, the former head of Human Rights Watch, has joined the chorus of criticism, calling the blockade a resumption of the war crime starvation strategy. Roth's statement highlights the severity of the situation, suggesting that Israel's actions may amount to war crimes under international law. The international community's condemnation and the legal challenges against the blockade demonstrate the widespread opposition to Israel's actions and the growing concern for the plight of Gaza's civilian population. The United States has proposed a ceasefire agreement aimed at extending the fragile truce between Israel and Hamas through the upcoming religious holidays of Ramadan and Passover. However, the proposal comes with conditions that have sparked controversy and cast doubt on its potential for success. Under the U.S. proposal, Hamas is required to immediately release half of the 59 hostages it currently holds. The remaining hostages would be released after a permanent ceasefire agreement is reached. While the U.S. has stated its support for Israel's decision to implement the blockade, the proposal has been met with mixed reactions. Hamas has accused Israel of attempting to derail the next phase of the ceasefire by imposing the blockade. They argue that the blockade creates an environment of distrust and undermines efforts to achieve a lasting peace. The hostage situation further complicates the ceasefire negotiations. Hamas views the hostages as leverage, while Israel considers their release a non-negotiable precondition for any agreement. Families of the hostages have urged the Israeli government to prioritize their loved ones' release. They have held protests, demanding that the government take concrete steps to secure their freedom. The families argue that their loved ones are innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of the conflict and should not be used as bargaining chips. Hamas has warned of humanitarian consequences for the hostages if the ceasefire falters. While the nature of these consequences remains unclear, the statement has raised concerns about the hostages' safety and well-being. The U.S. ceasefire proposal, while offering a glimmer of hope, faces significant obstacles. The blockade, the hostage situation, and the deep mistrust between the parties involved pose serious challenges to achieving a lasting peace. The success of any ceasefire agreement hinges on addressing the underlying issues fueling the conflict, including the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the need for a just and sustainable solution for both Israelis and Palestinians. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas has taken a devastating toll on both sides, particularly on the civilian population of Gaza. Since the war began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched an attack on southern Israel, thousands of lives have been lost and countless others have been forever scarred by the violence. Hamas's attack resulted in the deaths of approximately 1,200 Israelis and the capture of 251 hostages. In retaliation, Israel launched a military offensive in Gaza, resulting in a staggering number of Palestinian casualties. According to Gaza's health ministry, over 48,000 Palestinians have been killed, with over half being women and children. These figures highlight the disproportionate impact of the conflict on civilians, particularly the most vulnerable segments of society. The war has left a trail of destruction in its wake. Homes, hospitals, schools, and vital infrastructure have been reduced to rubble, leaving Gazans displaced and struggling to rebuild their lives. The International Criminal Court, ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last year, alleging Israel's use of starvation as a method of warfare against the Palestinian people. This accusation stems from Israel's long-standing blockade of Gaza and its control over the flow of goods and services into the territory. The ICC's arrest warrant and South Africa's genocide accusations against Israel at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, highlight the gravity of the situation and the international community's growing concern about potential war crimes committed during the conflict. Israel vehemently denies these allegations, arguing that its actions are justified on security grounds and that it has taken steps to minimize civilian casualties. However, the mounting death toll, the scale of destruction, and the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza raise serious questions about the proportionality and legality of Israel's military actions. The human cost of this conflict is immeasurable, leaving behind a legacy of pain, suffering, and distrust that will take generations to heal.